It's an absolute delight and a real honour to introduce our next speaker, who has done some amazing work. I'm just going to say a little bit about him, and I'm going to read this. So this is Professor Stan Gilmour. He's an experienced strategic consultant at the University of Kiel, with a 30-year history which includes law enforcement, public health and academia, and has been guided by a fundamental belief in compassion, trauma-informed approaches to societal changes. And one of his key themes is to try to create a much more compassionate justice system, particularly for individuals who've got caught up in all kinds of, at times, violent criminal behaviours and so forth. He's as a former director of the Thames Valley Violence Reduction Unit, Stan pioneered public health approaches to violence prevention, recognizing that sustainable change requires addressing the root causes with empathy and understanding rather than purely punitive responses. His leadership of risk technology within the National Police Chiefs Councils led to the development of innovative data sharing platforms that enable early intervention and support for vulnerable individuals. He's been involved with the United Nations Gender-Based Violent Crime Prevention. He's been involved with setting up organizational processes to support within prisons as well the ability to generate more trauma-based understanding. And he's done a lot of work on helping us understand that a number of these individuals that are coming into our services requiring compassionate understanding to their trauma also carry brain damage and other forms of damage. And he gave me an interesting statistic, I didn't know this, over lunch, that if you're a woman, you're far more likely to suffer brain damage from domestic violence than you are breast cancer. And I think the point that Stan is going to make is that we grossly underestimate some of the physical harms that have done to our individuals in prison, particularly when they're children. Anyway, so it's a real honor for me to welcome Professor Stan Gilmour for his talk.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll just get my notes started now that Paul's stolen the best part of my speech. Right, let's have a go at this. The slides work? Look at that technology. So thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining me here today. I've got some slides just to kind of center my my talk today, and I'll kind of flick through them as I go through my my notes as well. So bear with me. This is the first time I've kind of run this particular talk out, so it contains a lot of stuff that I've been working on, but it's in a format that I've not tried before. So hopefully you can treat me with some compassion. I'm going to talk about the intersection of compassion and justice, and as we gather here today under the banner of Transforming Minds Through Compassion, a theme that speaks to the very heart of what it means to be human in our interconnected world, as we explore how compassion can transform our bodies, minds and social relationships, I invite you to journey with me into one of the most challenging yet transformative applications of compassionate practice, the intersection of brain injury and our criminal justice system. When we speak of transforming minds through compassion, we must acknowledge a profound truth. Some minds have already been transformed, not by choice, not by intention, but by the neurobiological impact of injury, trauma, and adversity. These transformed minds, often carrying invisible wounds and altered capacities, frequently find themselves entangled with systems that struggle to recognize their unique needs and vulnerabilities. So today we will explore how the principles of compassionate mind theory can revolutionize our understanding of brain injury within criminal justice context, and how this understanding can in turn transform not just individual lives, but entire systems of justice and care. Brain injury is endemic within criminal justice populations, affecting nearly 90% of adults and at least 8% of youth offenders, yet remains largely invisible to practitioners and policymakers. This keynote explores how compassionate mind theory, comprising the three-circle model of threat, drive, and soothing systems, provides a transformative framework for understanding and responding to brain injury in criminal justice contexts. Drawing on recent research evidence, this address examines how brain injury disrupts fundamental neurobiological systems essential for emotional regulation, moral reasoning, and pro-social behaviour. The presentation demonstrates that many behaviours labelled as criminal are actually desperate attempts by injured minds to find safety and regulation within dysregulated neurobiological systems. The address explores the complex intersection of brain injury, trauma, and criminal justice involvement, revealing how intimate partner violence-related brain injury affects up to 90% of women experiencing domestic violence, with many showing persistent mental health impacts decades later, with research indicating that at least 80% of women in prison populations have experienced brain injury. We see the contours of a public health crisis that has been reframed as a criminal justice problem. Evidence-based interventions are presented, including eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, and dialectical behaviour therapy, DBT, and brain injury link work services, which demonstrate superior outcomes when adapted for neurobiological vulnerabilities. The presentation also addresses the significant brain injury prevalence among justice professionals themselves, with 38% of UK police officers reporting traumatic brain injury history, highlighting the need for systemic approaches that recognise vulnerability throughout the justice system. The keynote concludes with a vision for brain injury-informed justice systems, grounded in compassionate understanding rather than punitive responses. This transformation requires universal screening, comprehensive training, alternative pathways for brain-injured offenders, and addressing upstream social determinants. The central argument positions compassion not as mere sentiment, but as an evidence-based approach that recognises how neurobiological vulnerability shapes behaviour and demands proportionate, effective responses that serve both individual healing and community safety. To transform minds through compassion, we must first acknowledge the scope of brain injury within our criminal justice system. The statistics are staggering. Research consistently demonstrates that between 60 and 90% of individuals in UK criminal justice populations have experienced some form of brain injury, and that's compared to 10 to 15% in the general population. But behind these numbers lie human stories that illuminate the profound ways in which brain injury can alter life trajectories. Consider Sarah, whose childhood falls downstairs resulted in frontal lobe damage that went undiagnosed for decades. Her struggles with emotional regulation and impulse control were repeatedly interpreted as defiance rather than disability, leading to a cascade of educational failures, relationship breakdowns, and eventually criminalised behaviour. Consider Marcus, a former soldier whose blast-related traumatic brain injury not only affected his cognitive function, but triggered a persistent threat detection system that interpreted everyday social interactions as potential dangers. His aggressive responses, once adaptive in combat, became maladaptive in civilian life, ultimately leading to charges of assault. These stories illustrate what compassionate mind theory teaches us, that behaviour emerges from the interaction of neurobiological systems, social contexts, and learning patterns of response. When brain injury disrupts these systems, individuals may find themselves trapped in cycles of threat-driven behaviour that they neither fully understand nor control. So when a teenage child says, "I don't know why I did that," they perhaps don't know why they did it. And that can be seen as defiant or lying in criminal justice contexts, but it's an absolute fact. The types of brain injury we encounter in criminal justice settings are diverse. Traumatic brain injuries from accidents, violence, or sports-related incidents affects approximately 40 to 70% of offenders. Acquired brain injuries from strokes, infections, strangulation, or substance misuse create additional layers of vulnerability. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and developmental disabilities further complicate the picture. What unites these conditions is their potential to affect the very capacities that compassionate mind theory identifies as essential for well-being. The ability to recognize and regulate emotions, to develop self-compassion, to form secure attachments, and to engage pro-social behaviours. When these capacities are compromised, individuals become vulnerable to cycles of threat-driven behaviour that may bring them into contact with criminal justice systems. The Compassionate Mind Foundation, established years ago, provides us with a powerful framework for understanding the complex relationships between brain injury and criminal behaviour. Paul's compassionate mind theory, centred around the three-circle model, comprising the threat system, drive system, and soothing system, offers profound insights into how brain injury affects these fundamental motivational systems. Through a compassionate mind lens, we begin to see that many behaviours we label as criminal or antisocial are, in fact, the desperate attempts of injured minds to find safety, connection, or relief from suffering. This reframing is not about excusing harmful behaviour, it's about understanding it within the context of neurobiological vulnerability and responding with wisdom rather than mere punishment. The compassionate mind approach recognises that true transformation requires us to address the underlying systems that drive behaviour. For individuals with brain injury, this means acknowledging that their threat system may be hyperactive, their soothing systems compromised, and their capacity for self-compassion diminished. Our responses must therefore focus on helping to rebalance these systems through compassionate intervention rather than triggering further threat responses through punitive approaches. Consider how brain injury often disrupts the delicate balance between these systems. Damage to prefrontal regions may impair the soothing system's capacity to regulate threat responses, leaving individuals in chronic states of hypervigilance and reactivity. Injury to limbic structures may amplify threat detection systems, creating hair trigger responses to perceived danger. Teachers will often say, the pupil went from 0 to 100 in a flash, but they didn't go from 0, they went from 98 to 100. That flash response, it can take people by surprise, but it's perhaps no surprise when you consider the background. Meanwhile, the drive system may become dysregulated, leading to impulsive behaviours focused on immediate needs rather than longer-term consequences. Through a compassionate mind lens, we begin to see that many behaviours we label as criminal or antisocial are, in fact, the desperate attempts of injured minds to find that safety, connection, or relief from suffering that I mentioned. This reframing is not about excusing their behaviour, it's just about understanding it, the neurobiological vulnerability, in a way that we can respond with the wisdom that we generate from meetings like this. The compassionate mind approach recognises that true transformation requires us to address the underlying systems that drive behaviour. For individuals with brain injury, this means acknowledging that their threat system may be hyperactive, their soothing system compromised, and their capacity for self-compassion diminished. To develop truly compassionate responses to brain injury, we must understand how neurobiological changes transform the mind's fundamental capacities. The human brain is not merely a computer processing information. It's the substrate of consciousness, emotion, and moral agency. When injury occurs, it can fundamentally alter these core aspects of human experience. The prefrontal cortex, crucial for executive function and emotional regulation, is particularly vulnerable to injury. When damaged, individuals may lose the capacity for what we might call metacognitive compassion, the ability to step back from immediate impulses and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. This is not moral failing, it's the neurobiological reality of their lives. The limbic system, including structures essential for emotional processing and memory, may become hyperactive following injury. Individuals may find themselves trapped in persistent threat states, the amygdala firing alarm signals even in safe environments. From a compassionate mind perspective, we recognize that such individuals are not choosing to be aggressive or antisocial. They are responding to genuine neurobiological signals of danger. Perhaps most profoundly, brain injury can affect the neural networks that support self-compassion and pro-social behaviour. The anterior cingulate cortex and insula, crucial for empathy and emotional awareness, may be compromised. The default mode network, important for self-reflection and moral reasoning, may be disrupted. These neurobiological changes represent what we might call involuntary transformation. The mind changed not through conscious choice or compassionate practice, but through injury and trauma. Understanding this helps us respond with compassion rather than judgment to behaviours that may appear antisocial but actually reflect desperate attempts by injured minds to find safety and regulation. To truly transform minds through compassion, we must recognise that brain injury rarely occurs in isolation. Many individuals in criminal justice settings have experienced complex trauma, a constellation of adverse experiences that includes not only brain injury, but also childhood abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and social deprivation. Recent research reveals the staggering intersection of intimate partner violence and brain injury among women experiencing intimate partner violence. Up to 88% report histories of blows to the head, with 70% experiencing multiple incidents. The prevalence of brain injury among women who have experienced intimate partner violence may exceed that found in contact sports populations. And particularly concerning in this population, they show significant elevated rates of ongoing mental health difficulties in midlife, including depression, anxiety, and PTSD, often decades after the abuse ceased. When brain injury occurs in the context of intimate partner violence, the risk of ongoing PTSD systems can increase more than fivefold. This intersection becomes especially relevant when we consider that research indicates that up to 80% of women in prison populations have experienced brain injury. The pathway from intimate partner violence to brain injury to potential criminalisation represents a profound failure of our systems to recognise and respond to neurobiological vulnerability. From a compassionate mind perspective, we can understand how these experiences interact to create profound vulnerabilities. Early trauma affects brain development, particularly in regions responsible for emotional regulation and social cognition. When combined with brain injury, these effects may be amplified, creating individuals whose capacity for self-soothing and pro-social engagement is severely compromised. Consider the case of David, whose childhood included both physical abuse that resulted in multiple head injuries and emotional neglect that prevented the development of secure attachment. His adult behaviour, characterised by explosive anger, poor impulse control, and difficulty maintaining relationships, reflects not moral inadequacy, but the predictable consequences of developmental trauma combined with neurobiological injury. Traditional approaches might see David as a repeat offender, requiring increasingly harsh punishment. A compassionate mind approach recognises him as someone whose fundamental systems for safety, connection and regulation have been severely compromised through experiences beyond his control. This understanding has profound implications for how we conceptualise justice and responsibility. The prevalence of intimate partner violence-related brain injury may exceed that of breast cancer amongst women, yet remains largely invisible within our justice systems. When we consider that research indicates that around 80% of women in criminal justice populations have experienced brain injury, we again see the contours of a public health crisis that has once again been reframed as a criminal justice problem. The goal is not merely to suppress problematic behaviour, but to support the development of alternative ways of meeting fundamental human needs for safety, connection and dignity. This represents true transformation, not the imposed change of external coercion, but the organic growth that emerges when appropriate conditions for healing are created. As we explore transforming minds through compassion, we must not overlook those who work within our justice system. Police officers, prison staff, probation officers, lawyers and judges face unique challenges that can affect their own neurobiological well-being and capacity for compassionate response. Justice professionals work in chronically threatening environments characterised by unpredictability, exposure to violence and moral distress. They frequently encounter human suffering, trauma and behaviour that challenges their fundamental beliefs about human nature. This exposure can trigger persistent threat system activation, leading to what we might understand as occupational trauma. Moreover, many justice professionals face direct risks of brain injury through their work. Recent research reveals the stark reality of this occupational hazard. In a national sample of UK police officers, 4 in 10 reported a lifetime history of traumatic brain injury, with over 20% experiencing multiple brain injuries. Police officers with multiple brain injuries showed significantly greater cognitive and somatic symptoms, more severe PTSD symptoms, and were 2.5 times more likely to develop complex PTSD compared to those without brain injury history. Particularly concerning, brain injuries sustained during police duties increased the odds of developing complex PTSD very slightly, but enough for us to take notice. When justice professionals experience brain injury or chronic stress-related changes to brain function, their capacity for compassionate response may be compromised. Recent research demonstrates the severity of this issue. Police officers with multiple brain injuries experience significantly greater difficulties with cognitive function, including memory problems and concentration difficulties. They also report more severe symptoms across all trauma domains, with 1/5 of officers with multiple brain injuries meeting criteria for complex PTSD compared to only 10% of those without a brain injury history. These neurobiological changes can manifest as emotional regulation difficulties in interactions with service users, cognitive fatigue leading to poor decision making, and trauma responses that create secondary victimization of vulnerable populations. The compassionate mind approach recognizes that we cannot expect professionals to provide compassionate care to others without ensuring first that they have access to compassionate support themselves. This means developing organisational cultures that prioritise staff well-being, providing trauma-informed supervision, and recognising that professional compassion must be grounded in self-compassion. Research demonstrates that when justice professionals receive training in compassionate mind approaches, they report not only improved job satisfaction and reduced burnout, but also enhanced ability to work effectively with challenging populations. This creates positive cycles where compassionate professionals are better able to activate soothing systems in the individuals they serve, leading to improved outcomes for all. Our current criminal justice system, rooted in assumptions of rational choice and moral agency, predominantly operates from what compassionate mind theory would recognise as a threat-based paradigm. It responds to harmful behaviour with punishment, deterrence and social exclusion, approaches that may inadvertently trigger the very threat systems that contribute to problematic behaviour in brain-injured individuals. Consider how traditional criminal justice responses map onto the three-circle model. Arrest, prosecution and imprisonment primarily activate threat systems. The adversarial nature of legal proceedings, the unpredictability of outcomes and the harsh conditions of custody all serve to maintain chronic threat activation. And for individuals with brain injury whose threat system may already be dysregulated, these responses can be not merely ineffective but actively harmful. The drive system too may be poorly served by traditional approaches. The focus on punishment rather than meeting underlying needs means that motivational systems of driving behaviour remain unaddressed. An individual whose offending stems from basic needs for safety, connection or pain relief may find these needs further threatened by criminal justice involvement. Most significantly, traditional approaches rarely activate or support the soothing system, the very system that compassionate mind theory identifies as essential for regulation and well-being. Prison environments characterised by threat, deprivation and social fragmentation offer little opportunity for the kind of compassionate engagement that might support healing and transformation. This systemic failure to understand and respond compassionately to brain injury has profound consequences. Individuals cycle repeatedly through courts and prisons, their underlying needs unmet, their neurobiological vulnerabilities unaddressed. Recidivism rates remain high, public safety is not achieved, and human potential remains unrealised. Yet this very failure points towards transformative possibilities. If we can understand how traditional approaches inadvertently harm brain-injured individuals, we can begin to develop alternatives grounded in compassionate understanding of neurobiological vulnerability. Having explored the challenges, we can now turn to the solutions. Across the UK and internationally, innovative programmes are demonstrating how compassionate mind principles can transform responses to brain injury within criminal justice contexts. Liaison and diversion schemes represent early attempts to identify and respond compassionately to brain injury. These programmes, operating in police stations and courts, screen for neurobiological vulnerabilities, or should do, and connect individuals with appropriate support, or should do, rather than processing everyone through standard criminal justice pathways, or they should. They recognise that some behaviours may be better addressed through therapeutic rather than punitive responses. Specialist courts are applying compassionate mind principles in judicial settings. These courts take neurobiological factors into account when making decisions about court behaviour, sentencing and interventions. Judges trained in brain injury awareness can distinguish between behaviours that reflect moral choice and those that stem from neurobiological vulnerability, crafting responses that address underlying needs whilst maintaining public safety. Therapeutic communities within prisons demonstrate how institutional environments can be redesigned to support rather than threaten neurobiological well-being. These communities prioritise psychological safety, provide structured opportunities for emotional regulation, and focus on developing self-compassion and pro-social skills. Community-based interventions show particular promise for supporting individuals with brain injury. These programmes, often delivered through healthcare or social services rather than criminal justice agencies, provide intensive support for underlying vulnerabilities and needs, whilst maintaining community connections and avoiding the trauma of custody. What unites these approaches is their grounding in compassionate understanding of human behaviour. They recognise that transformation occurs not through threat or coercion, but through the creation of conditions that support natural healing and growth. They prioritise understanding over judgment, support over punishment, and hope over despair. The transformative potential of compassionate approaches to brain injury is not merely theoretical. It's increasingly supported by robust scientific evidence. Neuroscientific research demonstrates that compassionate practices can literally reshape the brain, promoting neuroplasticity and supporting recovery from injury. Studies of mindfulness-based interventions show that regular practice can increase cortical thickness in regions associated with emotional regulation and self-awareness. Compassion-focused therapy has been shown to reduce amygdala reactivity while strengthening prefrontal control systems. These findings suggest that compassionate practices may help rebalance the very neural systems that are often disrupted by brain injury. Research on attachment and trauma demonstrates that safe, compassionate relationships can activate neurobiological systems that support healing. When individuals with brain injury experience consistent, non-judgmental support, their nervous systems can begin to shift from chronic threat activation toward greater regulation and resilience. Perhaps most significantly, studies of recovery-oriented approaches in criminal justice settings show improved outcomes across multiple domains. Programs that combine brain injury screening, trauma-informed practice, and compassionate interventions demonstrate reduced recidivism, improved mental health, and enhanced quality of life for participants. These findings align with evolutionary perspectives on compassion that suggest our brains are naturally wired for pro-social behaviour and mutual support. Brain injury may disrupt these natural capacities, but appropriate intervention can help restore them. This represents true transformation, not the imposition of external control, but the reactivation of innate human capacities for connection and growth. To realise the transformative potential of compassionate approaches to brain injury, we must move beyond individual interventions towards systemic change. This requires embedding compassionate mind principles throughout the entire criminal justice pathway. First, we need universal screening for brain injury and trauma. Every individual entering the criminal justice system should be assessed for neurobiological vulnerabilities that might affect their behaviour and their treatment needs. This screening must be trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, and conducted by appropriately trained professionals who understand the complex presentations of brain injury. Second, we require comprehensive training for all justice professionals. Police officers, lawyers, judges, prison staff, and probation officers need to understand how brain injury affects behaviour and how to respond compassionately and effectively. This training must go beyond awareness raising to provide practical skills for creating psychologically safe environments and supporting neurobiological well-being. Third, we must develop the alternative pathways for individuals whose offending is significantly related to brain injury. This might include therapeutic courts, residential treatment programs, or intensive community support services that address underlying vulnerabilities whilst maintaining public safety. Fourth, we need investment in research that deepens our understanding of brain injury in criminal justice contexts. We particularly need longitudinal studies that track recovery trajectories and identify which interventions are most effective for which individuals under what circumstances. Finally, we must address the broader social determinants that contribute to both brain injury and criminal justice involvement. Poverty, social exclusion, inadequate healthcare, and educational failure all increase vulnerability. You're 5 times more likely to have a brain injury under 5 years of age if you're in the poorest 5% of the population. Addressing these upstream factors is essential for prevention and represents the ultimate expression of compassionate response. Ladies and gentlemen, we began this address with the theme of transforming minds through compassion, and I hope you can see how this theme illuminates both the challenges and opportunities before us. The minds we encounter in our criminal justice system, both those of service users and service providers, have often been shaped by experiences of trauma, injury and adversity. Many carry invisible wounds that affect their capacity for regulation, connection and pro-social behaviour. But the principles of a compassionate mind theory offer us hope. They remind us that minds are not fixed entities, but dynamic systems capable of growth and change throughout life. They teach us that transformation occurs not through threat or coercion, but through the provision of safety, understanding and support. They show us that even significantly injured minds can heal when appropriate conditions are created. The transformation we envision is multifaceted. At the individual level, it involves supporting people with brain injury to develop greater self-compassion, emotional regulation and pro-social skills. It means helping them understand their own vulnerabilities, not as sources of shame, but as understandable responses to neurobiological injury. At the professional level, it involves supporting justice practitioners to develop their own compassionate capacities, recognising that their well-being is intimately connected to their ability to serve others effectively. It means creating organisational cultures that prioritise psychological safety and mutual support. And at the systemic level, it involves redesigning our approaches to criminal justice to reflect compassionate understanding of human behaviour and neurobiological vulnerability. It means moving from systems designed around punishment and exclusion towards systems focused on healing and reintegration. But perhaps most significantly, it involves transforming our collective understanding of what it means to be human in a complex world. It calls us to recognise that we all carry vulnerabilities, neurobiological, psychological and social, that shape our behaviour in ways we may not fully understand or control. It invites us to extend to others the same compassion we would hope to receive were we in their circumstances. The case for transforming responses to brain injury through compassion extends beyond moral arguments to encompass compelling economic and social considerations. The current system's failure to address brain injury appropriately generates enormous costs, financial, social and human. The direct costs of repeatedly cycling individuals with untreated brain injury through courts and prisons are substantial. A single prison place costs around £47,000 per year, yet fails to address underlying vulnerabilities that predict reoffending. When we consider the additional costs of police time, court proceedings, victim support and social service involvement, the price of our current approach becomes staggering. But the hidden costs are even greater. Every individual with brain injury who remains trapped in cycles of offending represents lost human potential. These are often people with significant capacities who, given appropriate support, could contribute meaningfully to their communities. The social cost of this waste to families, communities, and society as a whole is immeasurable. Research demonstrates that compassionate, trauma-informed approaches to brain injury are not only more humane, but also more cost-effective. Research demonstrates that programs that combine brain injury screening, trauma-informed practice, and compassionate intervention can reduce recidivism and improve mental health outcomes. Evidence from liaison and diversion schemes, specialist courts, and therapeutic communities shows that when we respond to brain injury with understanding rather than punishment, we achieve better outcomes for both individuals and society. Moreover, the social benefits extend far beyond individual outcomes. When we respond to brain injury with compassion rather than punishment, we model for society what it means to care for vulnerable members. We demonstrate that disability does not diminish human worth and that everyone deserves opportunities for healing and for growth. So as we near the conclusion of our exploration, we must return to the fundamental question about the nature of justice itself. Traditional approaches to criminal justice assume that individuals freely choose their actions and should be held fully responsible for the consequences. But what happens to this assumption when we recognise that brain injury can fundamentally alter the very capacities that make free choice possible? A compassionate understanding of justice recognises that true responsibility must be proportionate to genuine capacity. When individuals' behaviours stem partly from neurobiological vulnerabilities beyond their control, justice demands that we respond to both the harm caused and the underlying vulnerability. This is not about excusing harmful behaviours, but about crafting responses that are both proportionate and effective. The compassionate mind approach offers us a framework for this more nuanced understanding of justice. It recognises that behaviour emerges from the interaction of multiple systems: neurobiological, psychological, and social, and that substantial change requires attention to all these levels. It acknowledges that punishment alone rarely transforms minds, and that lasting change emerges from the creation of conditions that support natural healing and growth. This perspective suggests that true justice lies not in the infliction of suffering, but in the restoration of well-being, both for those who have been harmed and for those who have caused harm. It recognises that many individuals in our criminal justice system are themselves victims of neurobiological injury and social adversity, and that their healing serves not only their own interests, but the interests of community safety and social cohesion. So as we conclude, I want to acknowledge that the transformation we envisage will not be easy. It requires us to question fundamental assumptions about human nature, moral responsibility, and social organisation. It asks us to extend compassion to individuals whose behaviour may have caused significant harm. It challenges us to invest in approaches that prioritise long-term healing over short-term satisfaction of punitive impulses. But the alternative, continuing with approaches that fail both those who have been harmed and those who have caused harm, is no longer acceptable. The evidence is clear that our current system perpetuates cycles of trauma and reoffending while failing to address underlying vulnerabilities or promote genuine public safety. The compassionate mind approach offers us a different path. It grounds our responses in scientific understanding of human behaviour and neurobiological vulnerability. It provides practical frameworks for supporting transformation and healing. Most importantly, it offers hope. Hope that even significantly individual minds can heal, that harmful behaviours can change, and that justice can be both compassionate and effective. This transformation begins with each of us in this room. It starts with our willingness to see beyond immediate behaviours to underlying vulnerabilities, to extend understanding rather than judgment, and to maintain hope even in the face of apparent hopelessness. It continues with our commitment to advocating for change in our professional context and supporting the development of more compassionate approaches. The theme of this conference, Transforming Minds Through Compassion, is not merely an aspiration, but a practical possibility grounded in robust science and emerging practice. In the intersection of brain injury and criminal justice, we have both profound challenge and extraordinary opportunity. The choice before us is clear. We can continue to respond to vulnerable minds with systems designed around threat and punishment, or we can embrace the transformative potential of compassion. I invite you to choose transformation. I invite you to join in creating systems that recognise the profound interconnectedness of all human experience and respond to vulnerability with wisdom, kindness, and hope. In doing so, we serve not only those directly affected by brain injury and criminal justice involvement, but our collective vision of what it means to build a truly compassionate society. The transformation of minds through compassion is not just possible, it's essential. The time for change is now. The capacity for transformation lies within us all. Thank you.
Well, that's thanks, Dan. That was an amazing run through, and I have to be honest, kind of aware of these things, but not quite how profoundly important it is for us to begin to recognize these biological aspects to the minds in which we are trying to help people, and the extraordinary problem of undetected brain damage in our prisons. But of course, it's also everywhere, and I suspect that a lot of these individuals who experience trauma and they adapt to trauma, including some of our politicians, actually are struggling because aspects of the brain they need for compassion and empathic care simply have been knocked out by their history. So I think what Stan's doing is raising very, very major questions about what is the basis of losing the capacity for things like empathy, emotional regulation, the interest in bringing compassion into the life of individuals and so forth. So just profound, Stan, just a profound talk. So we do have some time for some questions. So if you have any questions. Yes, there's one here. So somebody, so Kristen will bring up the microphone for you. It's okay, we'll just take the one lady here first and then we'll come to you. Is that okay?
Thank you, Stan. That was a really lovely presentation. Really enjoyed that. I'm a clinical psychologist and also neuropsychologist, so it's really interesting to hear the work that's happening in traumatic brain injuries. But I guess I was also interested in whether or not there's a parallel piece of work with older adults whose brains are changing due to progressive neurodegeneration, which may also sit on top of previous acquired brain injuries as well. So just interested in that, how we educate the justice system and the changes that may happen. Is that happening for older adults or not quite as much?
Yeah, there's great research going on up in Glasgow. Will Stewart's doing really great work on the kind of links between brain injury and then development of kind of age-related brain degeneration. There's all sorts of things that affect the brain's capacity to work properly through brain injury. Starvation, strangulation, traumatic and acquired brain injuries all come together to provide changes in the way that you respond to stimulus. And I don't think it's, well, there are plenty of reports from prisons, probation services and others that indicate the extent of the problem within prisons, but very little that I can see that's actually been done about it. So I think we do need to be continuing to talk about brain injury, and brain injury in the context of kind of recovery. In psychological terms, you treat the brain injury before or at the same time as you're treating the psychological injury. Otherwise, the two just compress on each other, don't they? So there are so many people that get some form of psychotherapy or CBT, whatever, in prisons, and nobody's treating the underlying brain injury. And we know that the high prevalence means that you can just about guarantee anyone you're going to be dealing with will have a brain injury. It's so prevalent. So treat everyone as if they do and you won't be going far wrong, but identify those brain injuries and provide therapeutic responses. You'll be much more successful in everything else you're trying to do. Does that kind of answer the question, or have
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just, my question is always about whether older adults are invisible.
older adults invisible, women invisible? Just about all of the research on brain injuries done on men and on male animals, when because women are far too difficult to understand, aren't they? So yeah, there is a huge amount of invisibility in the system, and how brain injury affects populations differently is really important as well. Brain injuries in women are different from brain injuries in men, but nobody's really paying that close attention to it, and especially, as you say, in the ageing prison population. What effect has their brain injury had on their life course? And I think we need to pay much more attention to that.
Thanks.
We'll bring a microphone because otherwise the online is won't be able to hear you. There's a microphone.
Thank you so much, Professor Gilmour. The only therapeutic prison that we have in the UK is HMP Grattan. Are they using compassionate approaches?
Well, I've not done any study there, but I can't imagine that they won't be if they call themselves a therapeutic prison, and the same for therapeutic communities in prison. We were having a chat over lunch as to, the difference between trauma-informed and compassion, and I think they can all be pulled together. There are differences, but I think unless you're using compassionate theories, you're not actually taking a very therapeutic approach to trauma, are you? And we've perhaps got an answer here.
Thank you. It's HMP Grendon. It's a whole prison therapeutic community, but we do have more prisons with therapeutic community wings on them. And we are fairly successful, I think, in training most of those prisons in compassion-focused approaches. So we're making slow headway, but we are getting there.
And it's a long journey to get into the Grendon, isn't it? So, it would be nice to see that available much more widely.
And we've got some gradual outcome data, I think, that's going to be trickling through. So hopefully in the next couple of years we'll have something to present back.
Yeah, and it's a long approach, isn't it, as well? It's not a quick fix. Yeah.
I can just add to that. So I work in the women's estate for the Women's Estate Psychology Service, and HMP Style, which is in Manchester, that's piloting a whole system approach. So within that, we do compassionate mind training for the staff. We provide staff space, which is reflective supervision, and we're also kind of building if you could imagine a prison from the ground up, that's what the whole principle is based on. It's obviously a very expensive model, but it's currently showing really positive, slow changes.
Yeah.
Ibrahim, back, Ibrahim.
Just while you're doing that, there's some real changes have come in the way that physical restraint is used in intensive and custody settings, isn't there? So we see real benefits in using compassionate theory rather than physical restraint, especially in some of our more highly therapeutic settings, and that includes the ongoing use of violence against staff. So it does have an overall good effect.
First of all, thank you so much. This was profoundly thought-provoking. I loved every bit of it. I have kind of a thought that I want to run by you and hear your thoughts on it. It's, I would think, a bit idealistic, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. So when you kind of mention brain injury there, I'm reminded of Sapolsky's latest book, Determined, and the notion that free will is a mere illusion, and we're all kind of have injury in the brain, so to speak. So would it be too idealistic to kind of assume, or let's say at least recommend that we're all immediately treated with compassion rather than kind of a punitive kind of justice system, one that kind of does not morally condemn the other, but rather kind of compassionately understand and rehabilitate?
Yes. I think Sapolsky's latest book's he's a bit out there, isn't it? I mean, he, to say the least, as he is. He's very clear in his earlier books that nothing that happens to you in your childhood determines how you're going to behave as an adult, but everything matters. He was very clear on that. And then he said in his latest book, nothing matters. So I think you're not being idealistic. You're setting an ideal, perhaps, but that's slightly different because you're not going on a Sapolskyan frolic. You're just stating that actually compassion is the kind of central anchoring point of society. Societies are built on trust. Trust is what gets you out of bed in the morning, and trust is built through compassion. And I think we need to start to understand behaviour more for what it is rather than for what it does, and try through the criminal justice system to be led by the science and led by the evidence, which we often claim it is, when clearly it's not, and become that more idealistic nation that you're thinking of. So thank you for that. It's
Thank you.
exactly right.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. It was great. I hope everybody could listen to your words and your findings.
Hope everyone was.
I was wondering, I don't know if I lost the message of how do you do the screening apart from people saying they had brain injuries? What do you suggest?
Yeah, the screenings are kind of difficult one. I propose that everyone should be, but I don't tell them how. There are some reasonably easy ways to screen, and there are some very much more complicated ones. And there are screening systems being developed, for biomarkers, etc. So I think it's something we need to keep working on. But there are screening tools available. They're often not used. They're often overly complicated, and I think this is where we can do more work. But there are some very simple, straightforward screening tools that are available that help to identify brain injury. But in the context of criminal justice, I'll say it again, it is so highly prevalent that we need to be putting more into the system to deal with it before we start worrying so much about screening it, because what happens once you screen. I've spoken to liaison and diversion teams. They say we don't screen for it because there's no support. What's the point in screening for it when there's nowhere for people to go? And people that are identified in custody settings go on a forensic pathway. People that are identified out of custody settings don't. Often both lead to the same cul-de-sac. So there's a lot more work we need to do, a lot more resource we need to put into how to perhaps deprofessionalise some of those systems and how to introduce more therapeutic approaches to rehabilitation than there are currently available within the professionalised system. And I work with a number of charities that are looking to do just that. So I think early identification of behaviour in schools, don't wait till it gets to prison, can help to identify more therapeutic journeys for young people to prevent them from being treated for their brain injury within a criminal justice system that has no resources. Okay, thank you.
So that's, I mean, I think you've inspired us all. And just one point about why CFT, because CFT targets a specific set of physiological systems, right? So CBT and ACT, all these things are not designed to target specific brain systems. So this link up, as you say, is very, very important. The more we understand how particular interventions target particular areas of the brain, the more we'll be able to develop our therapies for those rehabilitative processes. So one more time, thank you so much for a brilliant talk. Okay, so we have a break now, and then after the break, we will be listening to Pat Gerberg and Tom Brown, Richard Brown, on breathing practices that they've taken all over the world with using for trauma. So see you in half an hour.